Welcome back to Brain Chatter, where we listen past the daily noise and explore topics at the intersection of leadership, workplace culture, profit, and sustainability. I'm your host, Derek Brown. Today, we're exploring practical strategies for a disability-friendly workplace. Today's guest is John D. Kemp, CEO of the Lakeshore Foundation and author of a new book entitled Disability Friendly: How to Move from Clueless to Inclusive. This book has lots of content on organizational culture and the value of hiring people who are disabled, plus how-tos for achieving just that. First of all, John, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a privilege to be on with you, Derek, and I look forward to talking with you about this. This is a very important topic to me.
And John, you are truly the national expert and leader on this topic, and I know I have a lot to learn from you. In your book, one of the chapters is titled Talent Acquisition Through Outreach and Recruitment. And you point out that hiring practices and strategies have pretty much remained static for a very long period of time. The business disruptions of the COVID pandemic and the historic numbers of unfilled jobs have put a great deal of pressure on employers to figure out new alternatives. What would you say are the top takeaways and strategies you recommend for employers who want to be disability friendly in their hiring, but really don't know where to start?
Well, I sure like your question. It is probably the point at which a lot of small and mid-sized businesses really find themselves. They're looking for people who can do a lot of different jobs, have a lot of flexibility in their ability to handle a lot of different responsibilities, and they don't have the luxury of just hiring one person to do one set of skills. They need transferable skills, and sometimes they think people with disabilities don't have them. If they're physical challenges or physical responsibilities, it is difficult. But it all starts with the attitude and the willingness to try and broaden out the applicant pool and to reach out to people who are maybe they're considered non-traditional. I don't think of myself as a non-traditional person, as a person with a disability. So the best thing I think people can do is to get comfortable with the issue of disability and bring people with disabilities into the company to speak, to go to their vocational rehabilitation agency within the state governments, to go to service providers of people with disabilities and have them come in and do an in-service training program about what they do and who are people with disabilities and what are their interests and what do we want to do with our lives. And you'll find out that we're just like everybody else. And there might be a few things that we can't do, but most of the time with task trading and other kinds of things, there are a lot of small and mid-sized businesses that can definitely include people with disabilities in their workforce. And it will solve one of their biggest problems right now, which is finding talent. The world is all about finding talent today, and there are a lot of really well-qualified people with disabilities. I will tell you that there has never been a point in the history of the United States where we have had more well-educated individuals with disabilities, gone through grade school, high school, even college, and even beyond, who are unemployed. There's never been so many smart people with disabilities who are unemployed than right now in America. And that is unfortunate because I think people with disabilities want to work so badly. They want to be able to have their own apartment or homes. They want to have the flat screen TVs. They want a car. They want what everybody else wants. And I think people with disabilities will do whatever they can to make themselves available and attractive to small and mid-sized businesses.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a lot of good information. Well, let's assume that a company has successfully attracted and hired some very talented disabled people into its workforce, and they're doing a great job. And like all such team members, you as the manager want to retain them. So you have a chapter in your book, John, that's titled Hiring and Retaining the Best Talent. In it, you cover a lot of ground, but my question is about just one point. You said it's important to have purposeful and focused feedback methods. And of course, seeking active feedback should be something every company is doing on many topics. But what should the company leaders focus on specifically when seeking feedback as it relates to their disabled employee population that is different, if it is?
Probably the only area of difference is in whether someone needs a reasonable accommodation to successfully perform and safely perform the essential functions of a job. Otherwise, the feedback mechanisms should be pretty much the same as everyone else. And here's where I'm going to be pretty direct, and this involves folks with disabilities. There are no free rides in this country, and you've got to pull your weight. You're entitled to reasonable accommodations, which means de minimis, minor changes in the way an employer goes about having a job performed to accommodate a person's disability. But it doesn't mean that the employer is under any legal obligation to completely revise and revamp that job so that one individual with a disability can do it. It is a de minimis responsibility on the part of the employer. So for the most part, people with disabilities have to figure out how they're going to be able to perform the job, request accommodations, de minimis changes in the way work is done. And if that can be done, then they have to be held to the same level of accountability and responsibility in performing it successfully as every other employee. If the employer has the courage to give the feedback that says you aren't working up to your capability, you aren't working up to the standards that we have established here at this company, and we are going to put you on probation and give you opportunities to, correct and improve your performance. And if at that point it still isn't working, we're going to have to let you go. The biggest reason that I hear employers won't hire people with disabilities is because they are so afraid of having to fire them someday. And we don't like that. People with disabilities don't like that. We would rather say, hold us accountable. Don't lower the standards, because if you lower the standards for me working in this one job, you now lower the standards that you're willing to accept for all other people, including non-disabled people working at the company. That is not the way American business operates at all. So it is a de minimis responsibility on the part of the employer to accommodate. Once those accommodations are made, the disabled employee has to perform at a satisfactory level. If they're not performing at a satisfactory level, they should be given a warning. But if it's so egregious, they have to be fired. And then you're treating everyone the same. So I'm just encouraging all of the employers out there, don't be afraid to hire someone because someday you're going to have to fire a person with a disability. Have the courage to treat everyone the same, and that includes people with disabilities.
Great points. A primary question on all of our podcast episodes is answering the why does that or this episode's subject matter to the listener? My first thoughts on an answer for this episode after going through your book is, on one hand, we all want to be fair, and making workplaces disability friendly meets our own highest expectations of ourselves and for our organizations. But additionally, right out of the gate in your book, you note that people with disabilities make up at least 15% of the world's population, which translates to over 1 billion people worldwide, and about 80% of those are working age. So in practical terms, in the United States, where we currently have such huge numbers of job openings unfilled, it also means an additional source of qualified workers are within reach but not being reached by many employers. Have I even started to accurately capture the right answer to this question about why does disability-friendly workplaces matter to organizational leaders and employers?
Oh, I like your thinking. I really do. You have captured very well the essence of why this is so important. I think we tend to see people with disabilities as other people. And in fact, they are us. They are our family members. Many of us already have disabilities. Some of us are in denial over the fact that we have disabilities or conditions that are deemed disabilities under federal or state law. So there's somewhat of a challenge of, do I accept an identity of disability? And then how would I want my family members, if I'm not the one with a disability, to be treated? So I think the sheer enormity of our population and also the diversity within our population sort of overwhelms people. I would say one of the more telling facts that I've learned over the years is about 50% of the population of people with disabilities think of themselves as having a disability, only 50%. As we tried to develop a political, and that's a small p, political movement to try and make sure that we have our voices heard, we really don't have the full power of the 20%. We maybe only have 10% of the population of the United States, and as opposed to the 20% of the population being people with disabilities, because people slowly age into disability. Their ability to perform tasks and move about and live independently diminish. And so they just don't think of themselves. So it's not like, some people run away from the identity. Most people don't even regard themselves as being in it, and they are. But you're parallel to the incredible number of 11 million jobs that are open in the United States, and a huge number of people with disabilities who are qualified and unemployed, is exactly the dichotomy that we hope to resolve by producing this book.
Instead of going through your full introduction just right away, I'd like to share some details about your background as I go through the podcast episode. You're currently the CEO and president of the Lakeshore Foundation, and that's an organization with a reputation of major impacts on national and international levels. We'll turn to that a little later. But you've also previously been the National Executive Director of the United Cerebral Palsy Associations and General Counsel and VP of the National Easter Seal Society and CEO of VSA Arts International. As an organizational leader of organizations that actively serve populations of disabled people, what has been the number one challenge you've faced as a leader of such groups over your career?
To prove that we are worthy of the resources that are very necessary to enable people with disabilities to become independent, live independently, be self-sufficient, be ready to work and to work. So it's been a challenge for us in the public policy arena to secure the funding, because so many public policy demands are being made upon our governments. Government should do this and government should do that. I think what we're saying is we're citizens too, and that a little more investment in us will generate so much return on the investment, and it will allow us to start working and paying taxes and contributing to the well-being of society. So the challenge has been obviously aggregating enough voices and being able to obtain the resources that we need to serve people with disabilities properly.
So you have long been a leader on disability topics. You know about these topics firsthand. Would you mind sharing how this impacts your perspective?
If you don't mind, I would love to just share 4 or 5 core values of a disability culture. Is that all right? Do you mind
Of
if
course,
I jump
please.
into that? All right. Well, the first one is a heightened acceptance of human differences, whether they be racial, economic, class, whatever the differences are. But we, as people with disabilities, have a heightened acceptance of human differences. And why is that? Every day that I go out into this world and I wear artificial arms that are very apparent and artificial legs, apparent when I'm walking. Sometimes I'm riding in a scooter wheelchair. It's very apparent that I have a disability, and people come up to me and remind me, and they're very nice about it. Like, oh my gosh, what happened to you? And, are you okay? And what are you doing? And so I kind of get reminded every day that I am I'm different. Not good or bad necessarily. They're not patronizing and terrible. They're actually very kind and nice to me. I don't know why. I think other people don't get treated as nicely as I do, but there is this heightened acceptance of human differences, because if I am constantly being reminded of my disability, how do I interact with people who are different from me, people who are not white, who are women, people of different cultures and backgrounds and religious beliefs? I better be very accepting of differences, because I want to be accepted as equal myself. So that's one. Second is interdependence is part of our life. If I drop some papers on the floor and have difficulty picking them up, I hope somebody's coming by and will pick them up, and I owe them a great deal of gratitude, but that's it. I thank them very much for doing it. And that's what interdependence is. So the next time I can help somebody with something they need, like a letter to a government agency and do a little advocacy or help them out in some way, I do that. So I kind of pay it forward, but I count on other people for help, and they count on me for help as well. Third is a tolerance for lack of resolution. Nothing ever seems to quite be done. I think a lot of people who are listening to this will probably agree that they're constantly filling out forms for government assistance or, voter registration or applying for licenses, and you just have to keep saying the same things over and over. And it's someday we'll have a chip in our arm or somewhere, and it'll just download immediately, and that'll be filled out digitally, and we won't have to keep repeating the name, address, phone number, the basic stuff. But a lot of people with disabilities who are applying for benefits are constantly dealing with things that are not resolved. Okay, a fourth core value is disability humor, really finding something funny that bridges ourselves to the world. And the example that I always give, Derek, is that I stepped into a restroom for a quick bit of business, and the clamp on my right hand fell off, hit my shoe, and bounced under the stall and hit a guy in the foot.
Oh no.
And it was terrible. It was like I was really mortified. And I thought like 2 minutes went by, and I kept saying to myself, oh my gosh, and thinking like, this is where Valley speak came from, Valley talk. And I was so embarrassed, and I didn't know what to say. And finally, I said, excuse me, could you give me a hand? And this person started laughing. And I said, for once I have the right thing to say, but he said, I'll help you in a minute. Don't worry, I'll help you. So, people are willing to help, but it is that kind of bridging to let them see that we're real people, just like they are, and that we accept them and we want them to accept us just as real people. It takes a little while to get through kind of like the clamps and the disability and the wheelchairs and all that stuff, but there's a real person here. So that's really great. And the last one is the ability to read others' attitudes and conflicts in order to sort out, fill in the gaps, and grasp the latent meaning in contradictory social messages. What do I mean? That we people with disabilities read other people from 50 feet all the way up to when we're talking to them. And some people don't want to interact with us at all as we're walking down the street or rolling down the street, and they look away and they're whistling and they're doing anything. They don't want to connect. So we're reading all of the body language. And I know that HR folks don't want us to be doing that. We're not supposed to be, substituting what we think they're thinking for what they really are thinking. But we do this. We are so good at this. We've had our whole lives, most of our lives, to understand what other people are thinking. So we try to make people feel comfortable with us. We try to put people at ease. We spend about 2 minutes at it. And then if people still haven't connected with us, the human being, we move on. So those are the core values of disability culture.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing those.
You're welcome. I never thought I was going to be involved with disability issues when I first started out in my professional life. I started out after law school as an environmental lawyer, working for the US EPA. It was unleaded gasoline being introduced into the country. It was clean water and clean air. And, it just didn't touch my heart like issues of disability. And that's really because I grew up with my disability, and my dad properly prepared me for it. My dad was very good about really giving me the confidence and understanding as to how I was going to live my life. So while I was being an environmental lawyer for the first 3 to 4 years of my professional life, I was on the board of directors of the National Easter Seal Society out of Chicago. And I started getting very actively involved in what the advocacy issues were and how people with disabilities were and were not being served. I thought, well, we're going to get over this attitudinal barrier stuff in about 10 years. And I'll be doing something. I'll be an environmental lawyer, or I'll go into business, or I'll be practicing law. I'll do something. And the more I got into it, the more I realized it's hard for people to understand. issues of disability. And that's because there's so many different types of people with disabilities, from mental illness and mental health challenges to physical disabilities and intellectual disabilities and emotional disabilities. So we cover a very wide span, and that is challenging unto itself. And I realized I can't quit in the middle of an effort, a movement. And it became my life cause. And I'm really very happy with the fact that I have stayed with it and the opportunity to lead organizations when I thought that I would just be a soldier. And my dad helped me really understand leadership. I think my first jobs when I was in law school and in college, I saw what leadership meant, and I saw what it did mean. So I just enjoy leading and guiding and building organizations, and that's what, combined with my disability advocacy, has allowed me to become a leader in disability organizations.
Let's talk a little bit about your book. So it's titled Disability Friendly: How to Move from Clueless to Inclusive, and it's sold online through major booksellers, Barnes & Nobles, Amazon, etc., for anyone who wants a copy. I'll also put links to the book in our podcast show notes, which you can pull up at brainchatterpodcast.com. I have my autographed copy right here in my hand, so thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
How long have you been thinking about writing this book?
Derek, I've wanted to write this book for 20 years. It's just been a really long time. I have given maybe 2,000 speeches and 1-day, 2-day, and even 3-day training programs on this very topic, sometimes drilling way down into the depths of how people really feel about disability, and everybody is very different. So I have spent a lot of time putting together my thoughts on this and then presenting them. So when I finally said, I can keep giving speeches as sort of one-offs and the audience gets it and they leave and they sort of understand that I'm not yelling at them and I'm not upset with them. I'm trying to help them understand this very diverse world of disability. I realized I could probably do better if I put it down in writing and got it out there so that it would have a legacy. So I kind of combined all of the speeches and trainings that I have done and just my personal philosophy of what works with a company and put that into the book. So in part, it's autobiographical. In part, it's a deep dive into what is disability culture. A lot of people do not know what disability culture is, and people with disabilities do have a culture. And the majority of it is really about how to go through the work process from, finding people with disabilities to work in your organization, to elevating them, rewarding them, advancing them, and even terminating them. And so it took all of this time, get it down on paper and finally get it out. But it was the transition from Viscardi in New York to becoming the CEO here at Lakeshore that I said, well, I might as well just do this and go for it. And this is how it came about.
That's fantastic. If you wanted to just nail down what you hope the short and long-term impact of the book will be, what would that be?
People with disabilities are more like everyone else than they are not. And that this is not difficult. It takes a bit of a mind switch, a mind change, and a mind setting. But it is not impossible. And in fact, it's really quite easy. And I think once we start looking for the assets that people have and don't focus on their inabilities or their disabilities, we start embracing what people can do, then I think it becomes very economical and very logical.
Is it difficult to be an advocate when there is such a wide spectrum of people that you're advocating on behalf of?
Yes. I think a lot of people know a lot of individuals who happen to have a particular disability. And they get to know them and they get to understand what their strengths and weaknesses are, some of their limitations. And it becomes an awareness for them about that disability. my wife and I were speaking with a neighbor who has a child with a disability, autism, and that child is doing great, doing really well, has Asperger's. And she said, you would not believe the number of people in our school system who don't understand and don't take the time to understand what autism is all about. And she said, if people would just embrace this as, not as a negative, but as a positive, that would be great. So I think that's kind of the message that this book is all about. There are so many assets that we have and that we're prevented from using simply because people have a preconceived idea about the ability of people with disabilities. So it's your children, it's your brothers and sisters, it's your cousins, it's yourself, it's your parents, it's your grandparents, aunts and uncles, everybody around you. When you think 1 in 5 people has a disability, you got to know that you're amongst people with disabilities every day.
Your book has a chapter titled Corporate Culture and Disability Culture, and you've already touched on the disability culture. In this chapter, you talk about how the two are very intertwined when it comes to the workplace. Would you mind just again, real quick, defining disability culture and then describing how it intersects with any individual company or organization's culture?
Absolutely. Disability culture is not simply the shared experience of oppression. And I don't mean that in a harsh way, but for many of us who have a lot of ability, just like everyone else, and not being able to use it is pretty oppressive and frustrating. You think about a Stephen Hawking that who's since passed, but Stephen Hawking, to think that we didn't capture his brilliance and we'd let that slide by, just as an extreme example, what a loss to society and to our world, by not having his intellect as part of what we are doing. Even though he was nonverbal, especially in the later parts of his life, that's really difficult. So disability is not about a shared experience of oppression, not simply that. The elements of our culture include our emerging art and humor. There are a lot of comedians now that with disabilities who talk about the humor of disability. It can't be self-deprecating. That's not right and that's not fair. But we can. There are a lot of funny things that happen in our lives, and I try to talk about them. And I wrote about them in my book. The piecing together of our history. What is the history of the disability movement? Who are our heroes in the world? And FDR, for example, President Roosevelt, was a really severely disabled guy, but he felt that going through World War II, that if he were perceived as having a disability and the perception of people with disabilities then was very negative and it was a weakness, he thought that it would really do harm to the United States and its standing in World War II. So he hid his disability and the press went along with it. And that wouldn't happen today. I think if anything, the press exposes everything about everybody at any time and sensationalizes everything, so they've gone to the extreme on the other end of the line.
Yeah.
But he may be really, truly one of our heroes, but we have such incredible people like Andy Imperato and Judy Heumann and the folks who made Kemp and, just understanding that these are really extraordinary people who are part of our history and are really important people. Helen Keller, my goodness sakes, there's a person who overcame an incredible amount.
Well, also in your book, you discuss the digital component when it comes to the workplace or just even leading up to a potential opportunity. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. 30, 40 years ago, the federal government made a big statement about making sure that any buildings built with government money had to be accessible. Thus, building codes of states and local communities started to change and put in place accessibility as a requirement. It has taken a long time for the built environment to reflect that it is accessible. You still see flights of stairs and no elevators and no ramps. And it's perplexing that after 30, 40 years, this is the case. But the good news is almost every new building built in the last 20 years and going forward has been and will be built physically accessible to a whole host of people with temporary or permanent disabilities. Then you shift to the new era of technology and look at the information and communication age. And a website is probably the most frequently visited place for a job that anybody will go to. They will always look up and see whether it's on some of these recruiting websites. They'll give you a link. You go to the company, you check out the company, and if the website is not accessible to screen readers for blind people, or you've got a lot of videos and they're not captioned, you've got a lot of barriers to people with a lot of different kinds of disabilities. We all like to look at the closed captioning that's on TV because sometimes we miss the conversation on a movie. Well, closed captioning can be installed and very easily done, and people put it on. And Zoom, just as an example, has a button right on the screen that says turn on closed captioning. Everybody can read, or the viewer can read what people are speaking in real time using artificial intelligence. So the next big era has been to make sure that all of the new technologies that interface with people with and without disabilities give the user the option of customizing the experience of accessing that website and using its rich resources in a way in which it is meaningful to the user. So if I want to see captioning, I can click it on. If I want high contrast resolution, I can click it on. If I want larger fonts, I can click it on. I can customize it. If your website as a company doesn't have those options, you're disadvantaging a lot of people with disabilities. And it is something that is very, very, very important going forward for job recruitment, but also for selling products and services, for supply chain and disability-owned businesses to be able to participate. It affects everything. So that's the new frontier.
We haven't yet talked about the Lakeshore Foundation, where you serve as president and CEO. If you will, take a few minutes to tell us about Lakeshore and what Lakeshore does.
I am so privileged to be the president and CEO of Lakeshore Foundation here in Birmingham, Alabama. It's a local to global organization. I just got to give kudos to Jeff Underwood, who was the previous CEO, who, with a great board of directors over 30 years, built this magnificent place, which is an Olympic and Paralympic training center. It is a magnificent fitness center. We have pools and universally designed fitness equipment. We have basketball courts. We're the home to Team USA wheelchair rugby that took silver in Japan. And we're looking at Paris in 24, and we're going for the gold there. We have a very rich research program about the physical capabilities and the health abilities of people with disabilities. And we report on our research findings greatly that enhance and inform people with disabilities all around the world as to how to live a healthier, more fit lifestyle. But, one of the number one issues is diet and exercise and sports psychology. So when we think about all the things that we do here, we invite all of Birmingham's folks with physical disabilities and health conditions to become members of Lakeshore and to see what a world-class organization this is. So it's local to global.
That's fantastic. What have I not asked you that I should have? Is there anything you'd sort of like to close out with?
Well, thank you for this opportunity. First of all, I think your questions were very, very rich and deep, and I appreciate them very much and the ability to be given time to talk about them. I am married to an incredible woman named Samita, and we have set up home here. She is from here. Her children and their spouses and our 5 grandsons all live in Birmingham, and it's just a beautiful life that we have created here. I've had the privilege of working for world-class organizations and law firms all my life, and Lakeshore is in keeping with being a world-class organization. So it's a privilege to be here in Birmingham and being the CEO of Lakeshore Foundation.
Thank you, John, for your valuable time on the podcast and all the wealth of insights that you shared with me and the listeners. I also want to thank my friend and cousin, Holly Lawler, for opening the door to this conversation. For the convenience of those listening, we're going to post links to the various resources that we've discussed in this episode. That includes a link to John's new book, Disability Friendly: How to Move from Clueless to Inclusive, as well as links to John's bio and the Lakeshore Foundation. You can find all of those at brainchatterpodcast.com.
Thank you, Derek. Excellent.
Brain Chatter is a production of Ken Chapman and Associates Incorporated. We assist clients across North America and beyond with leadership development, corporate culture transformation initiatives, behavior-based professional development for health and safety issues, individual and team assessments, conflict and performance management, succession planning, and team building, making a difference in organizations and individuals' lives for over 40 years. Learn more at leaderscode.com. Thank you for your time.